So, when I was thinking about my senior project about a little over a year ago, I was in the middle of a tutorial in marine resource policy and a class in marine environmental history. So I was really interested in changes in the marine life, particularly local changes, and changes in the populations that aren't necessarily studied heavily because they aren't of commercial importance, like scallops or finfish, or things like eelgrass that have been labeled as really ecologically sensitive. So I was interested in looking at what's going on with those populations that nobody's really looking at, because there's been a huge range of human impacts in the history of Frenchman Bay. I mean, all the way back to the natives. They came down here for fishing camps, and then, there's a big groundfish fishery, cod and hake and other finfish. And then more recently, there's been scallop fishery, lobster fishery, sea cucumber fishery, mussel fishery. And there's not a lot of understanding of what's going on with a lot of the invertebrates. And so I decided, okay, I want to look at what's happening. But to do that, I need past data. And that data doesn't really exist. Because there was one guy who did a survey, a guy by the name of Proctor, who did a survey about 80 years ago. But unfortunately, the data that he gives just isn't really useful for looking at the kind of population trends that I was interested in. So I decided, okay, I'm going to make my own survey, my own baseline data set. So the goals of my survey were twofold, sort of, to create a program, a set of methods that future COA students and members of the dive club, the League of Underwater Superheroes, which I may or may not be a member, could come back to in the future and replicate and see what's happening in the bay. And so I created those methods, and then I set out to do that survey, create a baseline data on what sort of some relative population levels and patterns of distribution, because a lot of that information just isn't there. So after a pretty hefty review of all the different ways people do surveys of marine life while diving, I decided to do something called a photo quadrat survey, which basically means I'm taking pictures of quadrats, and a quadrat is just a rectangle on the bottom. And so to do so, I use this guy. This is, I tried making many different frames and different setups, but this is the one I finally set on because I like the size, and it helps me, it keeps the camera a consistent distance away from the substrate, so all the pictures are exactly the same. It's got a scale on the bottom so I can measure everything in the photograph. It's got a slate so I can take notes about the individual sites I'm taking pictures of. And so, to give you an idea of what a typical picture looks like, this is it. So this is off of Long Porcupine. I'll show you where the sites are in a moment. But that big orange blob is a sea anemone. There's a starfish down in the bottom middle, or a sea star, to be totally correct. There's also there's a nice big clump of hydroids up in the top left corner, which is the bushy, branchy things. They're a relative of the anemone. And so that's pretty much what a typical site looks like. A little more muddy, but that's about it. And so here's where I did my sites. For those of you who aren't exactly familiar with the area, the COA logo, that's pointing to about where we are. And the two red triangles are the locations of my survey sites. The one on the left is just off the tip of Bar Island, which if you go down to our dock, you can look out there and see it. It's right there. The other one is off the tip of Long Porcupine, and they're pretty similar sites in terms of, they're big ledges rising out of sort of flat expanses of mud and about 30 to 50 feet of water. And yeah, so I did this survey. I found some baseline levels of what's out there, but I think what was most important to me that I found was there's a huge level of variation in the populations. Like between the two sites, there was a really big difference in the species composition, and even between individual photographs within a site, there was a huge amount of variation, which I think really speaks to the need for establishing permanent fixed sites that you can go back to and take pictures of year after year. Because if you do a random survey like I did, year after year, the changes you see may not be a result of environmental change. They may be merely a result of sampling different spots. So I did some research on the methodology for fixing permanent locations, and over the summer with the League of Underwater Superheroes, in my free time from working as the deckhand for the college, I will be attempting to establish some permanent monitoring sites so that future COA students and future members of the dive club and general members of the community can get involved in this and can replicate my survey and establish, what kind of changes we're getting. And I had an immense amount of help from a lot of people. So thank you very much.